Buckle up, everyone, because we are diving into a news cycle that's buzzing about Kenya this week.
Right.
And you have sent in a collection of articles that, I have to say, really run the gamut.
For sure.
From political shakeups and social trends to, well, a guy who attended his own funeral.
Right.
I'm intrigued. Let's just say that.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a pretty accurate snapshot of Kenya right now.
Yeah.
You know, it's a nation with a lot going on.
Yeah, and we're unpacking it all. And I think a good place to start is with this political bombshell that is happening right now.
Right.
The potential impeachment of Kenya's Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua.
Right.
I mean, we're talking corruption charges, accusations of undermining the president.
Yeah.
What are the long-term consequences of something like this?
Well, I mean, this is a move that could really reshape Kenya's political landscape. I think, you see, impeachment of a deputy president isn't just about removing one person from office.
Right.
It has the potential to destabilize the entire government. And, you know, Kenya has a history of tumultuous elections and political maneuvering, so this could be a sign of deeper fractures within the ruling party.
Especially considering how swiftly this is unfolding. I mean, the National Assembly has already voted, and now it's on to the Senate.
It's really fast.
Yeah. And some of these articles mention concerns about the speed of the process, even suggesting it might be politically motivated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Several sources raise questions about due process and whether Gachagua is getting a fair shake, you know, a fair chance to defend himself.
Right.
And this rush to judgment, if that's what it is, could have serious implications for the future of Kenyan democracy. You know, it erodes public trust in institutions and sets a dangerous precedent for future political disputes.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And speaking of unpacking, let's shift gears to Kenya's economic situation. Because while this political drama is unfolding, the country is also grappling with rising living costs, loan defaults, and a whole lot of economic uncertainty.
It's a lot. Well, you're right. It's not just politics making headlines. Kenya, like many nations globally, is facing economic headwinds.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets interesting. Despite having record low inflation, the cost of basic necessities, especially food, is skyrocketing.
Wow.
So imagine going to the market and finding your usual groceries cost twice as much, but your paycheck hasn't changed. That's the reality for many Kenyans.
It sounds like a recipe for discontent.
It can be.
And what's the government's response to this? These articles mention something about currency swaps and bond switches, which honestly sound a bit like financial jargon to me.
It does sound like it, right?
Yeah.
Let's demystify that. Think of it like refinancing your home.
Okay.
Kenya is essentially trying to restructure its debt, maybe get a lower interest rate, or extend the repayment period.
Okay.
In the short term, this can free up some cash flow.
Right.
But here's the catch.
There's always a catch.
Right. If these walks and switches aren't managed carefully, they can actually balloon the overall debt in the long run. Plus, there's the issue of investor confidence. If international lenders see these moves as signs of desperation, they might think twice about investing in Kenya.
Right.
It's a high-stakes balancing act.
Yeah, a gamble for sure. And speaking of gambles, the news about the Marburg virus outbreak in neighboring Rwanda has to have Kenyan officials on high alert.
Absolutely. This isn't just a distant concern. You see, Marburg is highly contagious and carries a frighteningly high mortality rate.
Yeah.
Plus, there's no vaccine or cure, so prevention is paramount.
Wow.
The fact that Kenya and Rwanda have such close ties, both economically and geographically, makes this a very real threat.
It's a stark reminder, I think, of how interconnected our world is. A health crisis in one country can quickly become a global concern.
Absolutely.
But before we spiral into pandemic anxieties, these articles also highlight some more positive social currents in Kenya. Like, did you see that story about a group of young mothers in Narok County who are defying societal expectations and starting businesses together?
Yeah, it's a testament to their resilience and entrepreneurial spirit. You know, they're facing some of the same economic challenges we just talked about.
Right.
But instead of letting it paralyze them, they're finding ways to uplift themselves and their community.
Proof that even amidst the headlines about debt and disease outbreaks, there's a vibrant energy pushing for progress.
Exactly. But, you know, those positive stories don't erase the very real challenges.
Right. Yeah.
And some of these articles you share dive into social issues with deep roots.
Yeah.
Take, for instance, the ongoing debate surrounding khat.
Okay.
It's a plant with leaves that have a stimulant effect when chewed.
Right.
and it's deeply ingrained in some Kenyan communities, particularly among certain ethnic groups.
Right. I remember reading about that, but it's also causing quite a bit of controversy, right?
Absolutely. On one hand, you have farmers and traders whose livelihoods depend on the cotton industry.
Sure.
It's a major source of income for them. So a ban would have serious economic consequences, potentially pushing many into poverty.
That makes sense. But what about the other side of the argument? What are the concerns being raised?
Well, Islamic leaders in particular have been vocal about the social impact of khat.
Okay.
They argue that it leads to addiction, family breakdown, and even violence.
Wow.
They see it as a societal ill that needs to be addressed, much like other countries have grappled with drug use and regulation.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really is.
Economic interests versus social concerns, a dilemma that many nations face.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it highlights the challenges of governing a diverse population with competing needs and values.
Yeah.
The government is in a tough spot trying to find a solution that doesn't create more problems than it solves.
A balancing act for sure. And while we're on the topic of global politics, some of these articles touched on President Ruto receiving criticism from Kenyan Muslim leaders for his stance on the conflict in Lebanon and Gaza.
Yes, and it's fascinating to see how domestic politics and international relations intersect.
Right.
These leaders argue that Ruto should be taking a more active role in pushing for peace, drawing parallels to Kenya's involvement in peacekeeping efforts in Haiti, for example.
So there's an expectation that Kenya, as a regional power in East Africa, should be a force for stability and peace on the global stage?
You could say that, but this also reveals the complexities of navigating international relations.
Sure.
Every action or inaction has repercussions.
Of course.
And aligning oneself too closely with one side in a conflict can alienate others, potentially harming diplomatic relations or even economic partnerships.
It's a delicate dance.
It is.
And while we're on the topic of international affairs, these articles about the Haitian Prime Minister's recent visit to Kenya caught my eye.
Okay.
What's the significance of that?
Well, it seems there's a growing relationship between Kenya and Haiti, particularly around security concerns.
Okay.
Remember, Haiti has been grappling with escalating gang violence and political instability.
Right.
So this visit could signal a deepening partnership on security cooperation and perhaps even economic development.
Interesting. It seems like Kenya is trying to assert itself as a leader, not just regionally, but globally as well.
It's a sign of their growing ambition, for sure. But let's pivot back to domestic issues for a moment, because while Kenya is navigating these complex geopolitical situations, it's also wrestling with some major internal challenges.
Okay.
The healthcare system, for example.
Oh, right. These articles about the SHA rollout, or should I say the not-so-smooth rollout, are concerning. For those unfamiliar, SHA stands for Social Health Insurance Fund, and it's essentially Kenya's new national healthcare system.
Right.
But it sounds like the implementation has been, well, messy.
To put it mildly, the idea behind SHA was to replace the older system, NHIF, and provide more comprehensive and affordable health care to all Kenyans.
Right.
But the reality has been plagued with technical glitches, software malfunctions, and a lack of adequate training for healthcare workers.
Yeah. The articles mentioned hospitals having to revert to the old system, causing delays, confusion, and understandably frustrated patients.
It's a classic example of how even well-intentioned reforms can backfire if the implementation isn't carefully thought out.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a bureaucratic headache. It has real-world consequences for people's health and well-being.
Absolutely. Access to reliable healthcare is essential. And when a system fails to deliver on its promises, it erodes public trust and can have devastating effects, especially for the most vulnerable populations.
You're hitting on a crucial point. It's easy to get caught up in the technicalities of things like currency swaps or healthcare reforms.
Right.
But at the heart of it all are people, real people, whose lives are impacted by these decisions.
And those stories, their experiences, are just as important as the economic indicators or political maneuvering.
Exactly. For example, remember that story about the police officer who tragically collapsed and died at home?
Yes, that one stuck with me. It's heartbreaking, and the article mentioned that it's part of a larger trend of police officers in Kenya facing immense pressure and stress, leading to a worrying number of deaths.
It shines a light on the human toll of these systemic issues. These officers are on the front lines dealing with everything from crime and violence to the frustrations of a public struggling with a rising cost of living.
Right.
It's a pressure cooker, and it's taking its toll.
It makes you wonder about the support systems in place for those who dedicate their lives to such demanding, often dangerous professions.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that question of balance. Kenya right now is trying to balance so much.
Between navigating the global stage and addressing internal pressures, between pushing for economic growth and ensuring social equity, between enacting ambitious reforms and dealing with the realities of implementation.
It's a lot for any nation to juggle.
Absolutely. And those decisions, those balancing acts, are ultimately playing out against a backdrop of global uncertainty.
Right.
Remember that article you shared about the Adani Group, that Indian conglomerates investing heavily in Kenya?
Oh, right. They're involved in a bunch of infrastructure projects, right? Like that whole JKIA takeover thing, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport.
Yes. They were initially awarded a contract to manage the airport, though. That deal has been challenged in court.
Okay.
And then there's the power transmission line project they're involved in. It's all part of this larger story about foreign investment in Africa, its potential benefits and the risks that come with it.
Risks like?
Well, there are concerns about transparency, about whether these deals truly benefit Kenya in the long run, or if they primarily serve the interests of foreign corporations.
Right.
And then there are the environmental concerns. These mega projects often have significant environmental impacts.
Yeah.
And balancing economic development with environmental protection is a constant challenge.
It sounds like Kenya is at the heart of a global tug of war, with powerful forces vying for influence and control over its resources and future.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
But it's also important to remember that Kenya isn't just a pawn in this game.
Right.
They have agency.
Right.
They have choices to make. And the decisions they make now will have lasting consequences for generations to come.
It's a lot of pressure, a lot of weight on their shoulders, which makes those stories of resilience and ingenuity all the more remarkable.
Absolutely. It's those stories, the ones about the young mothers starting businesses, the healthcare workers trying to make a flawed system work,
Right.
the everyday Kenyans just trying to make ends meet. Those are the stories that offer a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit finds a way.
It's those stories that remind us why we should care about what happens in Kenya, even if we're thousands of miles away.
Exactly, because in a world as interconnected as ours, what happens in one corner of the globe inevitably ripples outwards, impacting us all in ways we might not even realize.
So given all that we've just discussed, the political turmoil, the economic uncertainty, the social challenges, the global pressures, what's the prognosis for Kenya? Where do they go from here?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question, and unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
But what I can say is Kenya's at a pivotal moment.
Oh.
The decisions made in the coming months and years will determine whether it succumbs to these challenges or emerges stronger and more resilient.
Right.
It's a nation with immense potential,
Yeah.
but it's facing some tough choices.
Choices about how to manage its debt, how to address social inequalities, how to navigate a volatile global landscape.
Exactly. And ultimately, those choices will be made by the Kenyan people.
Which is a good reminder that behind all these headlines, all these statistics are real people living their lives facing these challenges head on.
People with hopes, dreams, and the resilience to keep moving forward even when the path ahead is uncertain.
Well said. So for those of us watching Kenya from afar, what should we be paying attention to in the coming months? What are the key indicators that will tell us which direction the country is heading?
That's a great question. I'd say keep an eye on a few things. First, the political landscape.
Okay.
Will this impeachment process lead to further instability or pave the way for reform?
And on the economic front?
Watch how the government manages its debt and whether they can make progress on addressing the rising cost of living. Those are key pressure points.
And of course, the health situation, hopefully they can get this new healthcare system back on track.
Absolutely. Access to quality healthcare is essential for any society to thrive and finally pay attention to the stories of ordinary Kenyans.
Yeah.
Their resilience, their ingenuity, their ability to find hope in the face of adversity. Those are the stories that will ultimately define Kenya's future.
I love that focus on the people because their stories matter.
They always have. They always will.
Well, on that note, I think we've done a pretty good job of diving deep into the heart of Kenya today, from political earthquakes and economic fall lines to social currents and even a few tales of the unexpected. We've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have. It's been a fascinating exploration.
And a good reminder that the world is a complex, interconnected place. What happens in Kenya doesn't stay in Kenya. It ripples outward, impacting us all in ways we may not even realize. So thank you for sharing these articles with us. It's been a privilege to unpack them with you. And to our listeners, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep seeking out diverse perspectives, because the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.